Son. This Storm comic is amazing, dude. She becomes godly powerful at the end of all this. It's Storm's new level of power is it's absolutely nuts. So what this does here is this initially picks up with Storm kind of doing a bit of a press conference to a degree. And the cool thing about all this is that it comes hot off the heels of the fall of Krakoa and basically mutants all over the world having to leave the island behind and rejoining the rest of the world. And while we haven't really covered much of the X-Men, mostly because I've just been kind of pissy about the way that Marvel handled the ending of the Krakoa era, the reality is that the entirety of the mutant population, specifically the various parts of the X-Men groups, right? X-Men and Extraordinary X-Men and X-Factor and X-Force, they've all kind of split off and essentially done their own thing. Storm is very much the same way. And so one of the things that we learn here is that Storm has actually created a kind of sanctuary for various animals and flora and fauna that exist around the world. We'll revisit that here in a second, but one of the things that happens as they're kind of doing this introduction to her coming out to the world and speaking is that they talk about an incident in Oklahoma. Now, this is when we get an introduction to a new mutant in Marvel Comics. We don't really have a frame of reference for how powerful they are relative to other mutants that exist around the world, but presumably they're incredibly powerful because one of the things that happens is that when Storm arrives here, she actually arrives with Frenzy. Now, Frenzy's not the mutant that I'm talking about here. Frenzy's old school. She's been around for a long time. And Joanna Cargill is always one of these just incredibly slept on characters. Think of her as kind of a less powerful version of Luke Cage in Marvel, but still, right, she was like part of the Alliance of Evil, so basically part of Apocalypse's forces in the early days of the X-Factor comics, from Bob Layton and Jackson Geese going into Walter and Louise Simonson's run, right? It was a phenomenal story, right, when all that stuff popped up. But Storm is here because there's essentially a nuclear reactor that's gone off in this town. And all these people, right, are being bombarded with collapsing homes and so on and so forth. And for the character of Storm, a lot of this hits home to her personal life, her childhood, before she ended up becoming a thief out in Cairo, Egypt, that she did have parents of her own. Of course, those have been covered in various ways over the years in Marvel Comics. Most recently, I believe, in the 2006, maybe, miniseries for Storm. It was written by Eric Dickey, and I know that it's the one that covers like the whole history between Storm and Black Panther when they met as kids, but I think it also includes that aspect as well. But the reason why this matters is because this hits home with Storm. She lost her parents in the violence of life growing up during that period in time. And so she doesn't really want anybody else here to lose family in the same way that she did. And so her and Frenzy kind of work together to rescue these various people. Now, one of the things that I also want to establish here is that in the aftermath of the Krakoa era and some of the events that transpired that involved the X-Men, they've kind of become heroes in various ways. Now, a lot of that hero kind of perception came from things like when the X-Men were on Krakoa and they released medicines to the world that could cure people of any mental illness or could prolong their lives, different things along those lines. But there's a lot of positive attitudes towards mutants in Marvel, something that you rarely ever see. There is also a really cool demonstration of Storm's power in the sense that as these shockwaves from this reactor keep going off, she actually gets pierced by just some shrapnel from trees and whatnot, and she actually pulls it out and then freezes the ambient air around her and cauterizes the wound. It's pretty dope, right? It's pretty cool to see that Storm's using her powers in this way. But once she finally makes it to like where these shockwaves are originating from, she finds that it's really just kind of like a bunker, essentially, right? Where nobody really knew that the work was being done here. And there's just this incredibly powerful mutant down there that cannot control their powers that keeps emitting this pulse of radiation. But what's nuts here is that Storm puts her life on the line because in each moment that she stayed in this town, edging closer and closer to this kid who's basically emitting radiation, right, nuclear radiation, she's developing a worse and worse case of radiation sickness. Ultimately, she just kind of pushes herself to the limit, grabs this kid, helps to bring him down. Now, a lot of that happens due to the fact that Charles Xavier is currently in a prison, right? He was locked up after the events of the Krakoa Age's collapse, or at least in the events leading up to the collapse of the Krakoa Age. So he's not really part of the X-Men insofar as his traditional role of being a leader and a guide and the kind of person that would seek these people out and help them with their powers once they start to develop. But more so than that, this seems to be kind of the tip of the iceberg iceberg in terms of the things that people are doing, which is to say, governments of the world are finding Omega level mutants and then locking them down, right? Holding them almost as if they're some kind of weapon that can be stockpiled and used at a future point in time. And so what you end up doing is switching over to Storm as she's talking to Tony Stark, because while all this research and all these kind of investigations had been done, what Storm wanted was a secondary opinion. All these scientists who had been killed inside this facility, she wanted to believe the mutant was not the one responsible. But as Tony Stark tells her, he ran simulations, right? Ran tests over 800,000 times using various machines and resources that were provided to him from Reed Richards, Lunella Lafayette, also known as Moon Girl, Forge, Riri Williams, Shuri, some of the smartest and most capable people that exist in the world. And they all say the same thing. This mutant is the one responsible. And so Storm is faced with a quandary. Either she keeps this information to herself and starts off her kind of position out here in the world as a public figure among the X-Men by lying to the human population, or she follows her heart and she tells the truth about what really happened in Oklahoma. And she does exactly that. She tells humanity what it is that had happened. A new mutant's power had emerged. He was being used for whatever he was being used for, killed all the scientists in that facility, and incidentally killed so many people in that town. And all that goodwill towards a mutant population is gone, just like that. Here's the kicker. In the midst of this whole conversation, Storm is almost spiritually whisked away. And the reason why is because this kind of voice comes in and it says, I am eternity, the beginning with no end, and I have found you worthy of Aurora Monroe. And he says to me, my eternal Storm. Now, this is just kind of the beginning of Storm's journey here, because it gets nuts. And so while she goes forward with a new outfit, but not really a new set of powers or anything like that, that comes later. One of the things that happens is she kind of rescues this tanker from basically these pirates, right? And takes these pirates out and that kind of thing. But of course, again, she's suffering with radiation sickness. She's essentially dying. And where she goes to reach for some water in order to try to, quench her thirst and bring her energy back, the captain of the tanker comes out and says, we appreciate your efforts, but you need to leave because we don't want any accidents where you destroy the tanker and everybody on it, right? The mutant population is being turned against by humanity yet again. At that point, you kind of do this little bit of a fast track, right? Where you jump from basically 14 hours all the way down to 10 hours where Storm is dying. Literally, her hair is falling out of her head. All the telltale signs of radiation sickness are transpiring here. And so what she ends up doing is traveling to this secret hospital that nobody really knows about, or at least a lot of people do, but humanity itself doesn't really know about, right? The Night and Day Hospital for the extra mundane. And when she gets in there, she's greeted by Dr. Day, who doesn't want to have anything to do with the X-Men, right? He's like, you're an X-Man, I don't treat X-Men. And where Storm initially accuses him, right, of some kind of discrimination, being staunchly anti-mutant, his response is, no, not at all, right? Like, 80% of my clientele are mutants. It's not a matter of anti-mutant bigotry. I just don't like the X-Men. And when she asks the question why, it's a really cool answer that he gives. He says, when Night Nurse and I started this hospital, Tony Stark cut us a huge check on behalf of the Avengers and ForceWorks. And this is kind of a cool little thing. For those of you guys who don't know who ForceWorks are, most of you guys have heard of Avengers West Coast or West Coast Avengers. The names are interchangeable for the most part, even though the comic book title actually switches back and forth between the two. But after West Coast Avengers disbanded, Tony Stark actually brought on Scarlet Witch alongside Wonder Man and US Agent and somebody else as what was basically a whole new superhero team that operated privately using the funding of Tony Stark himself. That was ForceWorks, right? But he says, Doctor Strange consults here on behalf of the Defenders. Reed Richards supplies us with medical equipment on behalf of the Fantastic Four. Danny Rand donates on behalf of the Heroes for Hire. Even Moon Knight, who's incredibly cheap, paid good cash. Everyone chipped in. Everyone except for the X-Men. You had conquered death over on your little Krakoan island. You had your miracle pills, and guess what? You never gave us anything. Now, it's a really, really cool thing because what, again, it shows here is the consequences of the X-Men living on Krakoa in isolation from the rest of the world and only really paying attention to themselves. Yes, it kept the X-Men safe, but there is a price to be paid for solitude, and there is a price to be paid for putting yourself first. Whether or not a time ever comes when you have to pay that price is anybody's guess, but when that time does come, that price is usually steep. And so Storm presents him with a ruby that belonged to her mother. This is a very significant thing because Storm is giving away a piece of heritage that she can never get back, right? Her parents are dead and gone. So every little trinket, every bauble, every valuable artifact that she owns that belongs to her parents are worth more than anything in the world. So to present Dr. Day with such an incredible gift on behalf of the X-Men, and with him understanding exactly what the significance of this is, he tells her, the X-Men are welcome here whenever they need assistance for anything. Then he gives her the bad news. So you're dying. You're struggling with basically radiation sickness, and there's nothing that can really be done for it by me. So I've passed your case on to a guy who at one point served as the Sorcerer Supreme, which, by the way, you better hurry up. You got like 6 hours to live. Now, of course, he tells her all that in a far more doctorly and kind way than what I just said, although it does beg the question, what would you rather have? A doctor who ignores you while you get better, or a doctor who holds your hand and talks to you nicely while you die? As Gregory House once said, I guess it'd be terrible to have a doctor who ignores you while you die, but Storm ends up taking this adventure, right, and traveling on to this person who's effectively helping her. What's crazy is that along the way, she's suddenly hit by Oblivion. And Oblivion, the only real indication we get to his presence is the statement, Oblivion waits. But again, we don't know definitively why it is that anybody's hunting after her in this way. And in fact, as she continues on this path, she's eventually knocked out of the sky and kind of brought down into Haiti. And most all of you guys out there who are familiar with Marvel Comics know exactly who it is that's popping up here, because this guy says, unable to cast a simple defense spell, what would you do if your mutant abilities were taken from you, Aurora Monroe? Prepare yourself, goddess, for you are in the presence of the Gunner of Gods. And he says, hello, Storm. I will be attending to you this fine evening. It's Jericho Drum. It's Brother Voodoo, and it's so dope to see him in Marvel again. I can't tell you how long it's been since I've seen Brother Voodoo do anything meaningful outside of like the Strange Academy comics. Right now, maybe I'm missing out, right? Maybe there's some comic out there that has Brother Voodoo doing all kinds of cool stuff and I just don't know. But Jericho Drum is awesome. The long and short behind his story is that his brother Daniel stayed behind in Haiti to kind of become a sort of practitioner of magic, right? Now, not really a sorcerer supreme, but somebody capable with the use of voodoo in their own right. Jericho took off to the States. Eventually, he comes back to Haiti after finding out that his brother is basically dying, and his brother sends him on the path of becoming, or kind of taking the role that Daniel was supposed to take, a kind of protector. Come to find out, Jericho was always supposed to take that role, and he becomes this incredible practitioner of voodoo. There's also a time where his brother's spirit physically inhabited his body. Not so much anymore. They don't really share the same body anymore. Instead, his brother just kind of resides within the, the shrine of Brother Voodoo, and that's essentially it. But as he speaks to Storm, what he tells her is that as a necromancer, he not only sees the dead, but he also sees death sprites, creatures that can sense a life close to its end, a life force soon to be extinguished. And he says, in the business we do, risking our lives to make the world a better place, it is not a rare sight to see death sprites hover intimately around close friends. With the power we wield, we push death further away day after day. For you, I made a bargain with an ancient spirit to not just remove all of the radiation poisoning in your cells, but to remove all illnesses from your body. You are, at this very moment, the healthiest being in the entire universe, yet the biggest swarm of death sprites I have ever seen still hovers over you like flies over decay. And that's when you kind of learn the price that was paid for Storm basically being healed. And what this means is that because of the pact that was made between Brother Voodoo and this entity, Storm cannot use her powers for 7 days. Now understand, Storm is grateful for the efforts of Brother Voodoo in curing her, but she's also a little offended here. because she was never really given the opportunity to argue on her behalf on what price she was willing to pay, right, in order to keep her life and so on and so forth. But Brother Voodoo kind of fires back and says, okay, but like, here's the thing. You don't really understand what other options there were in this situation. I am hesitant to believe that you would have rather sacrificed 7 decades of your lifespan or the removal of 7 organs from your body. Or the last option that the Dark Spirit Egan gave, the loss of your memory, including the memory of how you breathe for 7 long months. So again, it's like there were much worse choices out here. The reality, Storm, is that you are as deadly with your fists and daggers as you are with your powers. You'll be fine. And I think we could both agree it's really the least worst thing that you would have to contend with. And Storm kind of agrees there. And so without her powers, she kind of goes forward for a little while. Now, again, she's gonna get amped up here. And that's where things get wildly crazy. Because what you end up doing is you switch over to Haven House, where you have Wolverine and you have Gambit and so on and so forth, where some of the remaining X-Men are basically residing and just kind of living their lives. And initially, there's the scent of Nimrod, right? The ultimate sentinel killing machine within this house. And Wolverine's just like, man, we gotta go do something, right? And it's just like, somebody respond because there's like kids in there, like somebody can get there faster than I can. Rogue goes flying by, she busts into the house and Storm's there, right? It was all just kind of a ruse between like Storm and Gambit and Logan and Nightcrawler to basically surprise Rogue, right? With one of her closest friends because they simply hadn't seen each other for a while. And it's this incredibly amazing and wholesome moment. And truth to tell, it's very reminiscent of the way things were handled in the old Chris Claremont era. In fact, there's this moment where like Logan tries to leave, right? Because you guys know Wolverine doesn't deal with mushy stuff, and Storm's like, no, get back here, old friend, and like drags him in for the hugs and the whole celebration of everybody being back together. But Storm's also here on business, right? Like if she's going to be without her powers for 7 days, one, she needs a way to pass the time. And two, she kind of has to rehone the fighting abilities that she has. Because truth to tell, Storm is a prodigious fighter. But fighting's like any kind of muscle that exists out there, right? The less you use it, the weaker it becomes. And so she basically starts sparring with Wolverine over time. Now, don't misunderstand, Wolverine loves this man. You guys know that dude loves a good fight. So any opportunity he gets to fight anybody for any reason, he's always down for. But the kind of romance that the two of these guys have shared historically over the years, which is to say, while really Wolverine and Storm weren't like the most powerful couple that existed in Marvel, and they weren't really like an official couple for all that long. Of course, most people know Wolverine was always gunning after Jean Grey. There was always kind of a thing between the two of them, and we finally get to see this amazing moment come to fruition where Wolverine tells her, right, when she's on day 5 without the use of her powers, he says, here's the rub, right? Like, we're going to be done sparring here. And when we are, this is no longer just kind of like a kind of practice session between the two of us. Now it's knockdown, drag out, right? I'm going to fight you to the best of my ability, and you're going to have to learn how to counter. Now understand, right? Wolverine has hundreds of years of fighting expertise. So much so that he is one of the people responsible for the training regimen of the Red Room program in the Soviet Union. Black Widow, right? All those guys, right? So Black Widow is as capable of a fighter as she is because of Wolverine, right? Because of guys like him. So this guy knows how to handle himself. But Storm, as most of you guys know, she's nobody's slouch. And this woman knows how to punch. And I love watching Storm fight. It's one of the things that I love the most about her character, right? She's incredibly capable when it comes to physical combat. She's incredibly powerful when it comes to her abilities. She's one story arc away from being able to alter reality in any kind of meaningful way. She's wildly powerful. But again, as the two of them are kind of sparring here and fighting one another, adrenaline is rushing and feelings are coming in hard and fast. And the two of them start getting it on. And it was only a matter of time, man. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's one of these romance things that I felt like just always worked. Storm and Wolverine just go so well together. But again, waking up on day 6, or kind of going into the middle of the night on day 6, she's visited by like this giant bird. And she's like, what in the world is going on here, right? Like, don't talk so loudly, you're gonna wake everybody up. And this bird says the one thing that all of you guys want to hear, right? You have been summoned by God Emperor Doom, ruler of Latveria, sorcerer supreme, and soon conqueror of Earth. He wishes to parlay with you on mutant matters, a grace born of royal empathy that only few have had the honor of enjoying. And so what ends up going on is Storm's just like, okay, I'm down for that, but like, can I ride on you? And it's kind of hilarious because the bird's just like, no, like, no, I have no desire to do that. And this is one of those things where Storm's just like, I mean, but Dr. Doom told you that I need to be there tonight, right? And the bird's like, yeah. And she's like, well, I don't have a Latvian visa, and I would rather not fly with my mutant abilities because, of course, she's not revealing that she doesn't have her powers. And the response of the bird is hilarious. He says, even if you possess the ability to hurl planets through space, you would still make this ridiculous request. Everyone does. And so he's like, very well, I will fly you to Latveria. Now, once Storm gets there, right, here's the really, really cool thing. Once Storm gets there, Dr. Doom's castle, right, his home is a place of opulence. And it is a place where those who are invited to come to Doomstat are actually treated as much as royalty as Dr. Doom is. And so when Storm arrives here, what's the first thing she gets? A royal bubble bath. A much needed bath. Then she outfits with some pretty scantily clad outfits. And I got to tell you guys, man, she ain't bad looking. And then she comes down in this beautiful green dress and this incredible outfit to join Dr. Doom for dinner. Now, it's this hilarious conversation between the two. And outside of Jonathan Hickman, I don't think I've ever seen anybody write Dr. Doom as well as he's been written here, because he says, green, your taste remains as immaculate as ever, Aurora Monroe. She says, if I did not know better, I would say you attempt to flatter me. And Dr. Doom says, Doom never flatters. And he says, you will not have to order a thing while you dine with me, Aurora. I have given my chefs extensive instructions regarding your plate preferences, so we may converse without frivolities. And so you get this really cool kind of flashback to Storm's childhood, where she's eating this food that was made by her dad. And it's just kind of funny, right? Because she's like, this soup is slimy. And he's like, it's the okra, right? It's supposed to be slimy. And she's like, okra with rice? And he's like, just try it, right? It's my very own recipe. And she absolutely loves it, right? It's this delicious dish. And Storm is touched by the fact that Dr. Doom would do so much research into her that he would learn what it is that she does and doesn't like, all the way down to the most minute details of her life. A dinner made for her by her father when she was a child. And she says, it tastes exactly as it did when I was a child. How do you know my father's gumbo recipe? And Dr. Doom just responds, I am Doom. It's the best response he could give here, right? And so at that point, she's like, dessert? And he says, yes, and a statement. As a mutant who soars through the skies, I'm sure you've been cautioned all too often with the tale of Icarus, that his wings melted because he flew too close to the sun. This same tale has become the mutant metaphor. You rose to be better, Homo superior. Now you've fallen even lower. But what the masses detest most about you is what I have found myself in admiration of, drawn to even. You reach beyond the stars, always ignoring how often you come crashing down, your strength renewed each time like Antaeus. And Storm, and this is an important aspect here, Storm, as she's eating the dessert, isn't necessarily the biggest fan of it. And Dr. Doom doesn't seem to notice. He simply says, I have achieved feats far greater than the loftiest ambitions of mere mortals. I am Sorcerer Supreme, and the world is my plaything. As a Romani who has faced discrimination by those who seek strength in majority, and a man who has reached beyond the stars as you have, I feel a kinship with mutants. That is why I want to make you my people. Doom's people. To harm the mutant race is to declare war against Doom. But first, another statement, because Storm's dislike of the dessert did not go unnoticed, and Doom sent his guys to grab the pastry chef, and he just says, draw and quarter the pastry chef on the refectory table. Doom abhors incompetence. It's nuts. He's gonna kill the pastry chef for getting the order wrong, right? for not doing a great job. Now, of course, Storm ends up throwing her dagger and takes the swords out of the hand of the executioner, and Doom stops the other dagger from, penetrating him. But then you get this amazing back and forth between the two, to the point that there's almost like a romantic kind of tension here. I mean, there's not, but I'll be honest with you guys, I could kind of see Storm and Doctor Doom together, right? She says, leave that man be. And his response, your winds could easily strike down my men, but instead, you hurl knives. And she says, and you choose to make mutants Doom's people at a time when many powerful governments have begun to stockpile Omega level mutants like they were nuclear warheads. Doom totally skips over that and says, you ride my bird to Latveria when you could flash here in an instant. And then Storm continues on, making her point, right? Where were your virtue and solidarity when Orcus murdered my people? Where were they when you attacked me and the Avengers in the Afghan desert? But again, Dr. Doom skips over that. You did not find my pastry chef's creation appetizing, even though it was tailor-made for mutant taste buds. The response of Doom, Victor, what do you truly want from us? What do you want from me? And that's when he puts it all together and he says, Aurora Monroe, you have lost your mutant powers, haven't you? He figures it out that fast without having any real statement made by Storm. And that's where she just kind of doesn't give him an answer here. And he says, you would need them for the task ahead. Rejoice, for Doom is kind. Your abilities I will return to you, my mutant ambassador. But Storm knows her life is on the line. The 7 days is not up. And so if her powers return to her, she's gonna literally be chased after and probably killed by whatever this deity happens to be that Jericho Drum made a deal with for her to basically be healed, but lose her powers in the process. And so she says, if you do not let go of me right this second, your reign will end even before it begins with a scorched god emperor. But her powers have been reinstated. And that's when the price is paid. That Storm is immediately attacked by this entity. And they say, no one breaks a pact with me, not even you, descendant of Asake. You used your powers before my 7 days were up. In return, I have taken the life I saved, your life. And for reparations, your beloved planet is next. And so that's when this entity manifests on Earth and starts facing off against Dr. Doom. And it's really interesting because you get this kind of statement here, right, where it says, fractured skull, burst jugular, broken spine, mangled entrails, punctured heart, splintered ribs. Aurora Monroe died even before her body touched the ground. As foretold, Storm of Earth is no more. And so for a moment, Storm travels to the afterlife. Now, here's the interesting thing about this, right? Like, we don't know exactly how this afterlife is working. If she's truly meeting with her father here, or if it's some manifestation of Mistress Death. Because as we know over the years in Marvel Comics, right, that death works in interesting ways. That in the old school Marvel Comics 1960 days, all you had was Hela. Those who died in honorable combat went to Valhalla, everybody else went to Hela's realm. Marvel introduces Mistress Death and says, actually, there is a one true afterlife that exists out there. Hela's whole thing is just only for those who believe in the Asgardian mythos. And when it comes to Zeus and so on and so forth, they have their own afterlives for people who follow their religious scriptures. But Mistress Death's dimension and afterlife itself can take different forms. In Marvel Comics, it looks different ways to different people. We know that when Jean Grey as the White Phoenix met Mistress Death during the Phoenix and Dark Phoenix sagas, way back during the Chris Claremont days. But regardless of whether it's an illusion or not, it's beautiful in terms of how it unfolds, because Storm has this incredible heart-to-heart talk conversation with her father, right? Where she says, there's so many things that I wish I could tell you, so many things that I could tell you and mom, right? Where's mom? Like, I was the queen of Wakanda. She always called me a princess, but I became a queen. I saved the world. Her little Aurora saved the world so many times. And it's such this like incredibly touching and beautiful thing. And that's where her father says, she knows. And we are so incredibly proud of you. And Storm asks, like, am I not coming with you, right? Am I not really meant to be dead here? And her father says, your mother and I would give anything to have you with us again. It hurt us deeply, leaving you all by yourself like a flame in the wind. but we've seen you grow to become a flame that refuses to be put out. The wind does not take from you, it fuels you. You write it even. And so that's where Storm accepts the reality of the situation. Yes, she's here in the afterlife, but she's not dying, because what follows is Storm returning. And we're told, for death is not the end, just a metamorphosis. Storm of Earth is no more. In her place, there will be something new, something more, something beautiful. And that's when eternity shows up and says, to me, my eternal Storm. And so Storm arrives on the scene, coming back from the dead, presumably powered by eternity himself. She's effectively a cosmic entity now. It's nuts. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Massive cliffhanger I'm leaving you guys on. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.